Are you familiar with the biblical giant named Goliath? Neither am I, aside from the name that is. But I am familiar with the beetle large enough to take that name. Today, we're taking a closer look at Goliath beetles and going in depth on how to raise and keep them. Goliath beetles are scarab beetles in the genus Goliathus, but unlike their size, the number of species is quite small. There seems to be only 5 recognized species of Goliath beetles: Goliathus goliatus, Goliathus regius, Goliathus cassicus, Goliathus orientalis, and Goliathus albosignatus. These beetles are primarily found in the tropical rainforests of Africa, ranging from the Ivory Coast in the west to Kenya in the east. I did come across 2 others though, Goliathus colbe and Goliathus atlas. Atlas seems to be a hybridization of Goliathus cassicus and regius. And I've also read reports from vendors stating that this species is next to impossible to find in the wild. Colbe, on the other hand, is a bit of a mystery. It appears that it has been treated as its own genus in the past and seems to be a bit smaller than the others. Goliath beetles are some of the heaviest insects on Earth, with males weighing up to 100 grams in their larval stage, which is the same as a newborn kitten, despite the fact that it can fit nicely in the palm of your hand. That's pretty impressive. But beetle larvae are always larger and denser than the adults, and adult males on average weigh between 50 and 60 grams. Adult males, which are the larger of the genders, reach lengths of 11 centimeters, or about 4.3 inches. Many sources will say these beetles are the heaviest on Earth, but I'm not convinced. The Hercules beetle is larger and has also been documented as being the heaviest. I guess you can decide for yourself which team you're on. When it comes to appearance, Goliath beetles are relatively unmistakable. Regardless of the species, they all share the same body plan, with a thorax that's got black uneven bands running vertically down. And I'm going to put a picture on the Instagram which has all the species side by side, with both genders. Now they do have some variation in coloring though. Common color patterns include black and white or brown and white, but some are also orange. Males have prominent Y-shaped horn-like structures on their heads, which they use for fighting other males over territory or mates. Females naturally lack these horns and have a more rounded appearance. Now, despite their intimidating size, Goliath beetles are primarily detritivores, at least when they're in their larval stage. They feed on decomposing plants and animal matter. In captivity, the beetles are often fed a diet of fruits as adults, such as bananas and beetle jelly. The larvae are actually fed dog or cat food to provide protein, and this diet is actually necessary to maintain their impressive size. The female beetles lay their eggs in the soil during the dry season, which is towards the end of their life cycles. In Africa, there's only 2 seasons, wet and dry, and each one starts at a different time depending on which side of the equator you're on. But the beetles emerge from their pupal chambers upon the first real rainfall of the wet season. The larvae actually make their pupal chambers at the start of the rainy season, and then they emerge in the following rainy season. The larvae start out small as you'd expect and grow into large white grubs over the course of 4 to 6 months. During this time, they are voracious eaters, consuming decaying wood, leaves, animal feces, and other organic matter that contains protein, like animal remains. This diet makes them incredibly important for the ecosystem, because the larvae take excess or decomposing matter and break it down further into nutrients that get returned to the soil and used by plants. I actually take the leftover soil from my rainbow stag beetle kimchi jars and use it as potting soil for my indoor plants, and I gotta say they love it, based on the growth I've seen. After the larvae reach their full size, they enter the pupal stage and create a protective cocoon deeper in the soil. This stage can last several months depending on the environmental conditions, but they usually come out of the ground when their pupal case absorbs a lot of water. The total lifespan is only about a year, with half of it spent in the ground as both a larva and pupa. That being said, there are captive Goliath beetles that have been known to live longer, like up to a full year past their emergence from pupation. Adult Goliath beetles prefer a more sugary diet compared to their larval stages, and can be found climbing trees for sap or scavenging for rotting fruits. Unlike the larvae, they don't need protein to grow, but they do need sugary energy for mating and flying. And yes, despite their heavy bodies, they are strong flyers. They have powerful flight muscles and large wings hidden beneath their elytra. When they take off, they produce a loud buzzing sound reminiscent of a small helicopter. This ability to fly allows them to search for food, mates, and suitable habitats over a wide area. The beetles are pretty mild as far as their temperament towards people and other animals go, but males are quite territorial and aggressive towards other beetles. They're also very strong, being able to lift 850 times their own weight. If we put that in terms of kilograms, then they can move around 26 kilograms. But keep in mind that the heavier the object is, the less it can actually move it. So picturing a Goliath beetle flying with or lifting 26 kilograms off the ground would be an exaggeration. They can certainly push around a rival male though. I also found in my research that male Goliath beetles can pick up on if a female is in his territory through pheromones. Mating happens on trees, and the males use their elongated forearms to grapple the female. These beetles are active at night to avoid predators, but also to preserve energy by avoiding the heat. The wet season can be very hot, and the dry season is, well, dry, so it makes sense that they've evolved to avoid the hot sun and reserve both energy and water. They aren't out in the savannas though. The native habitat for these incredible insects is heavily forested areas. This habitat preference and nocturnal activity is also something to keep in mind when looking to have one as a pet. They require wood to climb on, decent humidity, and will make noises at night, potentially keeping you up if they're in the same room. Now, I guess we should probably get into the details on having them as a pet, in case some of you all are interested. These beetles like a humidity of 60 to 70% and prefer warmer temperatures as you'd expect. So you should aim to have them in an area that doesn't drop below 68 Fahrenheit or 20 Celsius. Food is probably the easiest part of raising these beetles because there's so many different beetle jelly and insect jelly manufacturers out there. Of course, you could also give them bananas or other fruits, but no citrus. Not sure why, but that's what I've read, and I've never seen any citrus-flavored beetle jellies either. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, these are big beetles, which means your cage or container has to be a good size, especially if you want eggs. The minimum size recommended for pairs is 8 by 4 by 8 inches, but bigger is always better. For one beetle, you want the dimensions to be at least 3 times the beetle's length for the tank length and 2 times for the other dimensions. As for substrate, you can use anything because they don't eat the substrate. People use everything from coconut shavings, coir, potting soil, even hay. But if you want to breed a pair, then you need to prepare a container packed with flake soil, and it's got to be at least 30 centimeters in depth. Mated females will lay up to 60 eggs, which will look white and be half a centimeter in length. You want to move these eggs to smaller containers like 300 ml or so, half filled with beetle substrate, which in this case is primarily soil, because Goliath beetles don't grow in trees. You do actually want to keep the larvae in smaller containers, and there is a reason which I'm going to get into very soon. You should also never place more than 1 larvae in a container because they can and probably will eat each other. So here's the real interesting part about the larval development and the reason why you want them in smaller, easily monitorable containers. You're going to want to feed Goliath beetle larvae high-protein food, which could be everything from dog food to koi food. But koi food is apparently better because it's got more protein and less fat. Some people say to soften the food by giving it a quick soak, while others say this is unnecessary if the substrate is moist. One thing remains though, and it's that you shouldn't give more than what can be eaten, because koi food and dog food will contaminate the soil if left unattended. There's one more thing as well, and that's to put the pellets at the bottom of the container, because the beetle larvae tend to stay at the bottom. This is why it's crucial to have smaller containers, so larvae can easily find the high-protein food, and you can actually put it at the bottom and monitor it. Pupation is another big thing when it comes to Goliath beetles, because unlike other beetles where you can simply leave them, these need to have a simulated rainy and dry season. The larvae also need a substrate that's fine and inedible like clay or sand, but this is only when the larvae are ready to pupate. Most people use sand from a beach or some other fine sand and mix it with 40% peat moss or coconut coir. This sand solution should be moist enough for the beetles to build an oval pupal chamber. You know the larvae are ready to pupate because they'll start wandering around your container trying to escape. It's kind of similar to caterpillars actually. Once the beetles make this pupal chamber, it's important to leave them for at least 3 or 4 months. However, if you want to move the pupal cells, then you can attempt to do so after at least 2 full weeks after the wandering phase has ended. If the pupal cells are broken before the larvae inside have finished pupating, they won't bother making another, and you'll have to build your own. These pupal chambers should be allowed to dry, but not completely. The pupal phase usually lasts around 10 weeks, and then some more for the beetle to fully harden and be ready for eclosing. It was recommended to wait 5 or 6 months after the pupal cell is finished before simulating the rainy season. And to simulate this, all you need to do is add water to make the containers reach the same moistness they were at the start. And that's going to wrap up today's episode on Goliath beetles. I hope you enjoyed learning about these gigantic and fascinating creatures as much as I did. And don't forget to rate and review the show on your favorite platform. It honestly helps out a lot. If you want more content, make sure to check out the Patreon for bonus episodes, ad-free episodes, vlogs, and more. You can find all the links in the show notes, including the Instagram and Facebook pages. Thanks again for listening, and you'll catch me again next week.